Hello, dear listeners. Just a little preamble here before the episode starts. Just to say, you may hear in the background the sound of stomachs rumbling and or the pealing of church bells, both of which were outside of our control. So we hope they didn't get picked up by the mics, but they might have done. And yes, we apologise for that. Hello and welcome to It'll Be Alright in the 90s, the 32-bit podcast in a world of 8-bit competitors. I'm your host, Alex Greenwood, and joining me is my fully 3D rendered co-host, Stu Joslin. How are you, Stu?
Hi mate, pleasure to be with you yet again. We've been spending a lot of time in each other's company recently, haven't we?
Yes, it was just over 24 hours ago that we saw each other in the flesh at the 90s disco down at the Three Crowns. It was a good night, wasn't it?
Indeed, yep, loved it. We'll have a little debrief later, but it was lovely to see you in the flesh. You used my diesel, you ate my bacon, and then you left as soon as you'd arrived. So it was quite the whirlwind, wasn't it?
Take nothing but photos and leave nothing but footprints.
I should specify that's vegan bacon as well, just for anybody listening who knows that Alex is vegan and might have been shocked by my statement there. Vegan bacon, of course.
Yes. Well, before we go any further, today's episode is sponsored by Signosis in partnership with Electronics Boutique. If you head down to your local branch of Electronics Boutique and quote the code ALLRIGHT90s, you can get 10% off any Signosis title in store. So choose from exciting titles such as Destruction Derby 2, Colony Wars or Overboard. And we will be talking about at least one Signosis title later, so it ties in very nicely. And that is today's episode sponsor, Signosis, in partnership with Electronics Boutique.
Thanks very much to those guys. I can normally be found down in the Bath Southgate shopping centre at the Electronics Boutique brand, browsing the second-hand racks. Destruction Derby 2, I think, is my pick out of those, and I would imagine that's probably the one that's coming up later, isn't it? If I know you as well as I do.
It's not actually, because I think that was the 96 game. I've definitely talked about it at length at some point, so it must have been a 96 title. So it's a different one, so keep your ears peeled for that. Can you keep your ears peeled? You can on this pod anyway. We are, of course, talking about the games of 1997, and we will get to that later because it's going to be a real juicy one, isn't it, Stu?
It certainly is. I've got some of my favourite games of all time here ready to discuss. I think you keep your ears pricked, don't you, and your eyes peeled?
Yes, that's it, yeah. You don't want to get your eyes pricked, do you?
No, or your ears peeled. That sounds just as...
That's a little bit Reservoir Dogs, isn't it, I think? Time now for the bulletin board, and we've got a couple of things on it today, haven't we, Stu? The first thing I want to talk about, actually, Stu, is Waterworld, because I know that you dug it was a VHS, wasn't it? You dug out of the loft recently.
It was, yes.
And how did it go? Because you've never seen it before, am I right?
That is true. I hadn't seen Waterworld until early this year. That came out on our Movies of 1995 episode that we did a couple of months ago. Glyn heard this and rode to the rescue with his VHS copy that had been languishing in the loft for, well, at least 25 years, I would say, probably even more. I happen to have a VCR hanging around in my own loft, so I recovered the VCR. I had to buy a cable from Amazon that would connect the VCR to the TV, I have to say that. But fortunately everything worked, and we watched Waterworld on VHS, and I have to say I enjoyed the movie. It really did fly by. I really liked it, although the sound was awful on the VHS copy. Couldn't really hear what anyone was saying, and of course no subtitle option. My favourite part of the movie is definitely the bloke in the bottom of the oil well going, "Oh, thank God," when he's getting exploded by the, what's he called, the Mariner? That's him, isn't it? The Mariner. So, yeah. I really enjoyed it, and an early movie appearance for Jack Black as well, which I didn't realise. So yeah, I had fun. I liked it. Yeah, well, I'm glad you liked it. I haven't watched it for some time, despite it being, it's not a favourite, but I do enjoy it. I think I probably have the same sort of feelings as you do, but I'm glad you've got on the same page and you've managed to get around to watching, and in such a authentic 90s way as well with the VHS. I feel like it had to be, considering the line of business that we're in. Mm-hmm. I felt like I had the opportunity to view this as it would have been viewed in the 90s, and that opportunity had to be taken. Very impressed with the upscaling as well on the VHS to a sort of 50-inch screen, I think, is what we've got. And I was a bit worried that there'd be some funky aspect ratios at play, but great, isn't technology wonderful?
It is. I think VHS is long overdue for a revival in the same way that vinyl had it, a long time ago, and now CDs are sort of having it. I think cassettes maybe had it as well, a bit, and that's sort of around. But VHS is due one, I think, so maybe we could lead that charge here on the pod.
Definitely, there are tons of them in the back of the RSPCA shop in Chippenham, just waiting to be rescued and viewed once again. So let's do it, I say.
Yeah, we can start buying them up in bulk while they're cheap and make a business out of it. A nice little side earner for the pod. Oh, hang on, his ears have just peeled.
I did see one, actually, on my last visit to that shop. I did see one that made me think of you, but I didn't pull the trigger on buying it. It was a VHS. It was VHS of highlights from the Ford RS Owners Club at some racetrack in about 1994, and the guest of honour was Tony Mason, who was a presenter on Top Gear at that time. I don't know if you remember him. He used to do the rally highlights.
I recognise his name. I think if I typed his name into Google, I'd recognise his face as well.
It's probably still there, actually. Next time I go there, I'll see if I can find it.
If any VHS is still there, then it's going to be that one. What have you got over there for the bulletin board, then?
Well, let's just go back to what we were mentioning before and have a quick debrief on 90s night at the Three Crowns this weekend. So we're recording this on the Monday, listeners, and we had 90s night on the Saturday. Another roaring success. We decided to show this time two of our respective football clubs' greatest matches of the 90s. So I chose the 1994 League Cup final, Aston Villa 3, Manchester United 1. And Alex chose the UEFA Cup tie between Bayern Munich and Norwich City, which features Jeremy Goss's goal of the decade for the Canaries. So that went down well. We showed those on the big screen while we were playing the tunes, and then we finished up with some 90s adverts as well. Great response from the good people of Chippenham.
And I successfully prevented you from playing the Millennium Prayer, so I consider it a successful night in that respect as well.
Well, I thought if we were getting to the end of the night and people were sort of hanging around, then we could play it as an encouragement for people to leave. But as it was, things wound down pretty naturally, and we didn't have to wield Cliff as the final weapon, did we? It was fine, but it's still there in the back pocket if it's ever required. Very
much the colonic of the DJ's box of CDs there, isn't it? Just for flushing out the pipes.
I'm really not sure how we would get the royalty check to Jesus, though, if we ever did play it.
Yeah, that's the
something
thing.
That's played on my mind.
He's not signed up to PRS, I don't think, is he?
No.
Or her, or she, or they.
Well, we'd have to leave it to Jeff, wouldn't we? That's what he's there for, isn't it?
Yeah. We have some correspondence in the form of a voice note here, Stu, from Legend of the Pod Kate Pro. We always love hearing from Kate, so let's play that now.
Good morning, Alex and Stu. Alex, please tell me you've watched The Craft now. And if you haven't, please can we have a sleepover and watch it? We can levitate our friends, practice spells. It's the best film. It's so good. I'm actually thinking a lot about The Craft, but then it got me thinking about 90s things in general. I was very into kind of astrology, tarot, witchcraft, paganism, all of these kind of things. And do you remember Mystic Meg? So she's well known in the 90s, but I had a magazine. I used to get a magazine on the regular, and I cannot remember what it was called, but it was like I thought it was the Mystic Meg magazine. So I Googled that, and I cannot find anything about it. But I think I remember getting rune stones from there. I can't remember what they're called, the little pendulum swing thing that you can ask questions. Loads of things, crystals. So I'd love to know if anyone knows what that was, the Mystic Meg magazine from the 90s. But yes, there we go.
Well, Stu, I for one loved that creaky door at the end. Maybe some presence entering Kate's room as she was recording that.
I think it's Pipes from Ghostwatch, one of our very early episodes. Pipes has come back into play.
Yeah, maybe. So what do you think? A pod sleepover then?
Yep, definitely up for that. We can watch some classic 90s movies that we've both failed to get around to as yet. But Mystic Meg as well, Kate was asking about. I'm fairly sure she's come up on the pod before, either in passing or in more detail. She was a really big thing around the sort of mid to late 90s on the National Lottery programme and in the newspapers, wasn't she?
Yeah, it was that lottery tie-in when the lottery was a
Mm.
massive deal. Is the lottery shown on TV anymore? I don't think it is it? It's not on.
No, I don't think so. Last I heard, ITV legend Stephen Mulhern just reads out the numbers during an ad break, I think, on a Saturday night, and that's it.
Oh dear. But yeah, if anyone out there has any memories of the Mystic Meg magazine, do let us know, because that's not something I remember. But it's, the magazines were so big, as we were talking about in our Loaded episode. Magazines were so big in the 90s, there was so much out there that I don't doubt at all that there was a Mystic Meg magazine at one point around the 94-95 height of her fame. So yeah, let us know. I'd love to levitate Jeff though, wouldn't you, Stu?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, we could give that a try. That'd be a lovely thing to try.
Something for the sleepover. Did you know that he invested in rune stones in the 90s? And that's one of the reasons why, because it didn't work out inevitably, and that's why he's one of the reasons why he's been lumped with us, basically, because it just he lost a lot of money on rune stones back in the day.
I bet he runes the day he did that. A couple of things. First of all, Mystic Meg, General. Do you think there's anything in it?
No.
Okay, neither do I. That's good. We're agreed on that. Secondly, I mean, we've just touched upon it there, but I wanted to bring this up. The National Lottery being a self-contained programme that had music acts on it and other things going on, as well as the lottery draw. Mm. We used to be a proper country, didn't we?
Yeah.
It's now relegated to being read out on an ad break or at the end of a news bulletin. When I saw a clip recently, this was referred to in the Kerrang magazine that had the free CD with the midget track on it that I showed Richard when he came on. And John Bon Jovi had flown in, especially from the US, to do a appearance on the National Lottery show, which was hosted by Bob Monkhouse that week. But It was the only thing he came to Britain for. I think all of his other things have been cancelled, but he had to do this. So he had to get on a flight specifically to come and play 3.5 minutes on the National Lottery show. And then Kerrang got about a 20-minute interview with him while he was in the dressing room. But this used to be such a big thing. It used to be a centrepiece of Saturday night entertainment. Noel's House Party, Casualty, the National Lottery programme, Match of the Day.
Yeah.
Where's it all gone? It's something that we ask a lot on this podcast, but it's something that we never seem to find the satisfactory answer to.
I suppose the lottery used to just be on a Saturday, didn't it? And gradually it got more and more regular. And I think is it every day? Or it was Saturday and then they did the Wednesday one as well.
It's twice a week. I think it's still twice a week.
Okay, still twice a week, okay. I suppose people just... Online gambling came along. There were different ways to waste your money on gambling, and other things overtook it in the schedules, I suppose. But yeah, I want to know where Lancelot is now. Where's Lancelot and where's Guinevere? They languishing, gathering cobwebs in some BBC warehouse somewhere, or are they still being used for those big money balls every other week? I mean, every week.
If anyone knows, please get into. I bet it's just a computer now, isn't it? I bet there's no.
Yeah, probably.
There's no theatrics about it. I refuse to believe that Michael McIntyre's big show is any better than the National Lottery show used to be. I know which one I would prefer to watch.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Yeah, he doesn't have Mystic Meg on his, does he, giving predictions? So how can it possibly be as good?
There you go. Case closed.
One very quick thing here from Requester90s, our friend on X, which we have now left. So that's a shame, but we have reconnected with the Requester90s on Blue Sky, which is great. Something you can do as well, because we are now on Blue Sky. I will give you the details on how to find us on there at the end of the show. But Requester90 said, in relation to our episode on secondary schools, just a very short message, and they say, my music teacher played us Sweet Child of Mine every week without fail. Isn't that
oh, wow,
an odd thing for music teachers to do, of all the songs in the world?
Yeah, I hope it wasn't the dopey radio edit that they play, which cuts out all of the best parts of it. I'm sure it wasn't. But yeah, that's quite a strange one. We used to have to sing the same songs a lot of the time. And I remember at a certain time during my secondary school years, our music groups, there were 2 music classes in our year, and they used to get combined quite a lot, and we would just have big singing lessons. I think when the teachers probably were a bit indisposed and couldn't do anything else with us, we would just have some overhead projections put up and we would sing for an hour. But yeah, Sweet Child of Mine every time. A great song though it is, I can imagine that would get a little bit wearing.
What's the final thing you've got over there, Stu?
I've got a Simon Dakin update, if you remember him from the last episode.
The lift shaft footballer?
The lift shaft footballer, indeed. Now, I agonised long and hard about sending Simon Dakin an email and asking him for a couple of his thoughts on his biography in the book, which I read on the last episode. But then I thought, he doesn't refer to the fact that he was a professional footballer on his website. So clearly that's part of his life which is in the past. I didn't feel like I should come in unsolicited and start bothering him about something that happened years ago. So I thought, best to let sleeping dogs lie on that front. Although, Simon, of course, if you are listening and you want to get in touch, please do. But I did manage to find this nugget from a Football League message forum from a few years ago, which mentions Simon in passing. So I'll just read this to you. In the mid-90s, football in England became sexy in a way that had seemed impossible just a few years previously. Sadly, through crass mismanagement on and off the pitch, Hull City didn't just miss the boat, but aimlessly floated around on a piece of driftwood while the rest of the world steamed ahead. Yet there was something endearing about us. So this is a Hull City supporter that's written this. Mm-hmm. Our ragtaggle bunch of free transfers, youth players and non-league imports were often so out of their depth that there was a certain glory in their naffness. And nothing seemed to sum up this naffness better than when our decidedly average right-back Simon Dakin, a free transfer from Derby County, fell down a lift shaft on a pre-season tour of Spain in 1995. At a time when Eric Cantona was kung fu kicking thuggish fans and Tony Adams was drunkenly ploughing cars through the front gardens of Essex, our players' misdeeds were in keeping with our relative mediocrity on the pitch. Biscuit, as Dakin was naffly nicknamed, that's 3 uses of the word naff now in this piece, never fully revealed the details of what happened that fateful evening, though it's fair to presume that tomfoolery and/or sangria was involved. The broken collarbone kept him out of the first team at the beginning of the subsequent season, and Adam Lowthorpe's general excellence meant that he never quite retained his place in the Tigers' defence. He was released in 1996. Non-league, including a lengthy and successful stint at King's Lynn and a career in law, beckoned for Dakin, and you can't help but wonder if he specialises in suing negligent Spanish hotels. So that's about as much as we know about Simon Dakin. If you want to know a little bit about Adam Lowthorpe, I refer once again to the 1996-97 Footballers Fact File. And again, this one starts quite alarmingly. Adam Lowthorpe, hospitalised after receiving concussion and facial injuries in a pre-season friendly against Leek Town. Adam, and then it goes on to say about his season, and he was one of the club's willing triers, it says here. So a difficult season for Hull City all round, with some, well, horrendous and hilarious injuries there by turns. But that's, I think, about as much as we're going to find out about Simon Dakin, and I just wanted to close the loop on that one.
That's a shame. Well, thanks for conducting such a thorough investigation. Sometimes, you know, these things, you can't fully square all the circles. I use that phrase so much on this podcast, and in no other like part of my life do I use that phrase, and I never think I'm saying it right. But anyway, yes, I you did your best, and I appreciate the digging you've done there. And I want to know more about that horrific facial injury against Leek Town. What happened there? Was it a collision with a post, or was there a particularly violent centre-half thug at Leek Town at the time? Or I don't know.
Leave that with me. I'll see if I can find out for the next episode. It also brings me back to the idea of the "it'll be alright in the 90s" bingo card. So a listener could tick it off when you say squaring the circle. They could tick it off when I say absolutely in response to something, which I always do. There's loads of tropes in this podcast. We really ought to get those printed up.
Well, let's not make people aware of them, because I think people will then not be able to stop spotting them.
That's true, yeah. We've just given you 2 for free, haven't we? Time now for What's the Most 90s. We're still patiently waiting for winter 2025 to come to an end. So why not take a trip back to the golden summers of the 1990s as we discuss what the most 90s ice cream or ice lolly is. Alex, thoughts?
Lots of options for this one, I think. A very nostalgic memory is having ice lollies, ice cream in the summers. It's obviously a nostalgic time of the year, and yeah, there just are lots of options. But I think it's one of those difficult subjects. It's similar to the petrol stations one, where it's hard to know which ones were actually 90s and which ones were actually really old. So I went through quite a range of options. Like, well, I won't say them all because you might have picked one, but the one I've eventually plumped for is the Mint Feast. So, of course, the Feast, big chocolate bar of the era and before. And I've gone specifically for the Mint Feast because this was launched in 1988. So it it would have hit its stride in the 90s and it wouldn't have been around before. And I assume you can still buy them. I'm pretty sure you can still buy them. But I think this was in the era where mint choc chip was in its heyday, basically. I think it's not something you see very often now, mint choc chip. It was very 90s. It was definitely a favourite of Brother of the Pod, Adam. And yeah, that's why I've gone for it, really. I think the Feast, famous, of course, for having a chocolate bar in the middle. And the mint one just fit with the theme, I think. So that's why I've gone for that.
Well, that's a great choice. I think I have gone for one. Well, I know I've gone for one, which is still available today. But I had to go with it because it was my favourite one of the 90s. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought I haven't had one of these for years. And with the fruit pastel ice lolly coming a very close second, the one with the different colours, different colour rings as you go down the lolly, I've gone for the Walls Twister.
Nice,
now, I tried to find out when the Walls Twister initially came onto the market. I couldn't find that information, but I definitely had a lot of these during the 90s when my mum used to have to pick me up to walk me home from primary school when I was smaller. We would pass Pickwick Papers, Chaplins, on the way home. I don't know which name you would know the shop by, but there's a newsagent in Corsham that we would stop by quite often on the way home. And if it was warm, then I might be lucky enough to get a Twister for the journey home. I've not had one for years, but I can still remember what they look like on the inside when you unwrap one. And I'm looking forward to the next time I have a Twister. I think it's going to be a real Proustian rush. So that's what I've gone for.
That's a great choice. It's actually making my mouth water just thinking about these ice creams. This was one of my possible choices for What's Most 90s today. I think it's a really good choice, and I also remember them. Some of the other ones I was thinking of were the Zoom, the Fab, the Knobbly Bobbly, the Funny Feet, which I think has also made a comeback. But looking at them, most of them seem to originate from decades ago, so they may seem 90s, but they're not actually. And I found a little bit of trivia, which, if I'm allowed to go into some trivia for some ice creams that weren't 90s.
Of course.
When you think of Fab, other than the ice lolly, what do you think of?
Thunderbirds?
Exactly. So the Fab and the Zoom lolly were both released to capitalise on the popularity of the Thunderbirds. This was in the 60s. And I had no idea. So originally the Fab was aimed at girls, and the Zoom, which is obviously rocket shaped, was aimed at boys. And I think the Fab had Lady Penelope on the wrapping, apparently, so it was a proper tie-in.
Okay.
And I had no idea about any of that. And then it was apparently quietly phased out, the connections to Thunderbirds in the 70s, I think, when I guess the Thunderbirds became less popular. But it was just a little bit of pre-90s trivia there that I came across.
There is one fact that I can tell you, which I thought was going to be the fact you were going to tell me. But there's something I think about Roger Moore having invented the Magnum.
Yeah, I
Do you know this?
Heard something about that, yeah.
That he liked chalk ices, but he didn't like the fact that they weren't on a stick. So he asked Walls if they could make a chalk ice on a stick, and that is where the Magnum came from. It's an oft-repeated piece of ice cream stroke movie star trivia, which I'm not entirely sure is true, but there it is.
Oh, we're forever in his debt for that. We have to give a shout out to Adam, brother of the pod, legend of the pod, who gave us this idea, this suggestion for What's Most 90s. And his suggestions for the answer to What's Most 90s ice cream or ice lolly were Gino Ginelli or Walls Kickoff lollies. Do you remember either of them?
Gino Ginelli, yes. I remember the advert for that. Kickoff, I don't, I'm afraid. But Gino Ginelli was more of your ice cream in a tub that you kept in a freezer at home and had when a friend was over after school.
Yeah.
Natural successor was the Viennetta, of course.
Yes, of course.
But yeah, I think Gino Ginelli was more that area of things.
Yeah, I have a memory of there being a Tutti Frutti ice cream at some point in the 90s, which maybe that was Gino Ginelli. It was like vanilla ice cream and it have these little bits of, I don't know what they were, just brightly coloured bits of something that was the Tutti Frutti bit. And that died out. It sort of burnt very brightly, but very briefly. Because it just disappeared really quickly. I wonder if that was Gino Ginelli. And the Walls Kickoff, I think, was like a Funny Feet. It was just a ball-shaped, or a disc-shaped block of ice cream on a stick, basically, with very vague Adidas Tango style, not Tango, Telstar style patination.
Yeah, let's have it right.
So I think that's what the Wolves kickoff was. Yeah. But if you out there listening have a better suggestion for what the most 90s ice lolly or ice cream was, then please do let us know. Stu, what are we going to put in the ledger out of these options?
This is difficult. This is very difficult.
It is, isn't it?
I mean, I really do want the Twister to go in, I have to say, but you make a compelling case for the Mint Feast, so and we can't keep throwing it out to the listeners, can we? We have to decide some things on our own.
I keep forgetting to put them out to the listeners as well, so we should choose. I think we should go for the Twister because it was going to be one of my runners-up, and also you've actually tied it to a very specific 90s childhood memory, so it's for that alone it's got to go in, I think.
Okay, I'm happy to take that. The Twister goes in the ledger.
Time now then to get on with the main topic, which is the computer games of 1997. So, big year for games, as we'll shortly discover. But Stu, what was your gaming landscape in 1997? Where were you at? What did you own? What were you where were you?
Lucky enough to have quite a few consoles in the house by this point. So I would have had my Game Boy, we would have had a PS1, we would have had the N64. The Sega Saturn was probably, well, it definitely was still hanging around because I still have it, so it definitely was still hanging around. And then our very first PC was on its way as well by then. So
wow.
Glyn, to give him his due, was very much into console gaming at the time, and I reaped the benefits of that, and I was very lucky to be able to experience games across a plethora of platforms. Oh, a plethora of platforms, I like that.
That's lovely. Absolutely lovely.
Very, very nice turn of phrase.
Well, you were very lucky then to have all those games consoles at your disposal. I only had, well, the Amiga was still there, but it was superseded in spectacular fashion by the arrival of the PlayStation 1 for my birthday in July 1997. I think I've got that right. It must have been 1997. It was obviously released in the UK the year before, so you must have got it really quite early then to have it already.
I thought we did, but now I come to think of it, I think Glyn might have chosen the Sega Saturn over the PlayStation to begin with, because we had the Mega Drive before, and he wanted to stick with what he knew.
Yeah.
So I think actually, come to think of it, the PlayStation did come along a bit later than 1997, and we had the Saturn for a while, so I think I was incorrect in my previous statement. Apologies, Glyn, before you write in.
Yeah, so as I say, the Amiga 1200 was still around, and we were probably still playing it for a bit. There would have been a bit of crossover where we had the PlayStation and the Amiga. Didn't want to completely drop the Amiga, but the lure of 32-bit gaming on the PlayStation, it was such a jump up from the Amiga that it was very hard to resist.
It's the siren call from the shore, isn't it, that you can't help but go and respond to.
Yeah. As I've alluded to on previous episodes, I did find it quite an emotional sort of wrench, weirdly, getting the PlayStation, because it felt like I was going to have to turn my back on the world of Amiga gaming, and that had been my life up to that point, and I was so used to that, and I felt like I was sort of almost like joining the mainstream and doing something that everyone else is doing. And yes, it was a weird thing, but it very quickly became like a massive obsession, as we'll come across in some of the games I'm going to choose. But that's where I was. I think we probably had a PC knocking around as well. So, as usual, we've each picked 3 games from my year. Obviously, these are not games we necessarily played in 1997, but they're games that were released in 1997 in the UK. And, we maybe played them in subsequent years, but they were released in 1997. So, Stu, maybe you should go first.
I'd love to. And I'll start with a game that I played on that PC when it arrived. And it's FIFA Road to the World Cup 98.
Nice.
And this is one of the first up-to-date FIFA titles that I had. And then I subscribed to them for quite a few years after that. This is the one with David Beckham on the cover for the UK market. I'm sure a lot of people listening will remember that. And this actually came with the PC that we got from Time Computers on Hathaway Retail Park in Chippenham back in the day. And it came with a compendium of 4 games, which included the aforementioned FIFA Road to the World Cup 98, Theme Hospital, a golf game called PGA Tour Pro, and Need for Speed 2. So I think you'll agree that is a strong quartet of games to be delivered with your first PC. So this is special to me for a few reasons. First of all, it's linked to the World Cup in 1998, which is the first one that I really watched, and took notice of, so it's special to me for that reason. Also, it had a lot of data in the game, so this was the first FIFA game that had pretty much all of the countries that had competed to qualify in that World Cup. So you had, obviously, England, Brazil, France, but you also had American Samoa, for example, and I remember them because they were first in the list when you went to pick a team to play against, and other teams that hadn't qualified. So there were lots of teams that you could pick and choose from. You had all the club teams as well, so you could play club teams against international teams, and of course the famous indoor mode, which I think they stopped after Road to the World Cup 98. I don't remember it being in FIFA 2000, which was the one that I then got next. I didn't get 99 for some reason, but I got FIFA 2000, and that was the one that I really, really played. But FIFA 98, FIFA Road to the World Cup 98 was my gateway drug. The one thing I do want to talk about, though, is customising teams. So this was the first game on which I really got into customising teams. I'll put myself in teams, I'll put my friends in teams. I remember having a team of people in my class at school, but then eventually I came round to creating my own team, creating where they were from, thinking of the stadium, designing the kits, and designing the players and their personalities and their looks. And it's a team that I still think about quite a lot. So the team was called Laycock Town, despite the fact that Laycock obviously is not a town, but they were called Laycock Town. And they played in an orange and black strip, because I was a big fan of the Netherlands national team at that time as well, so that was an homage to them. And I can still reel off the starting 11 for Laycock Town and the substitutes and things like that. I had them in FIFA 2000 as well, but Road to the World Cup 98 is where they started and where I really started doing that. And it was quite a creative thing to do at the time, and I would make up match reports, and like I said, the players had their own personalities, and it wouldn't happen in the game, but I would make up if like one of them had an injury, so I would bring them off and put a substitute on, even if it hadn't happened in the game, and things would happen like bookings and sendings off, and then players would get banned, and that would fit in with their personalities, and that was one of the most sort of creative things I did when I was younger, was to create this team and have that running narrative, and yeah, I still think about them a lot, and I remember them very fondly. So yeah, Road to the World Cup 98 on that PC, which I loved, that first PC, for the indoor mode, and Laycock Town mainly is what I'm going for.
Very nice, very nice. Did any of those players ever fall down a lift shaft in pre-season? In any of your stories?
No, unfortunately they didn't. I remember I had a player who wasn't even in the squad. I remember I had a defender called Simon Shaw, who was just, he had like a cruciate ligament injury. So he was on the sidelines. He was always in the stands, but he never actually got to play. So it was that realistic.
I love the creativity that you've shown there.
Go on then, mate. What's your first choice?
I have gone for a game published by the episode sponsor, Psygnosis, developed by Bizarre Creations. It's F1 97, released on the PlayStation and Microsoft Windows. This was a sequel to F1, as it was called, which appeared on the demo, the official demo disc of the pod, Demo 1. So I had a bit of a taste of that. But this was an upgrade in lots of ways. It still used the same games engine and everything, but it was much smoother graphics. And of course it was the 1997 season, which was the season that we were seeing as the game came out, so it was really up to date, which is quite unusual for F1 games. And this was, it was a really good F1 simulator, better than anything else I played on consoles up to this point, and I played it a lot. And this was right at the height of my F1 obsession, basically. I sort of started to get into it in 95, really got into it in 96 and 97. I hit my stride. I knew who everyone was. It was all over my folders at school, so it just hit at exactly the right time for me. And that, combined with the fact that it was a genuinely good game, the difficulty level was really good, so you could do whole seasons, as I often did, and you never quite knew where you were going to finish. You could do a pit strategy, and it was one of the only racing games I'd played up to this point, and I think still to this day, where you could get an engine failure out of the blue. You could be driving down, the pit straight at Jerez in first place, sailing to victory, and then you'd get a puff of smoke just gradually trailing out the back of your car. So it would be sort of annoying, but it was that element of accuracy just made it so much better, I think, and I really appreciated that. As I said, all the teams and drivers from the 97 season were represented, apart from, sadly, the MasterCard Lola team, which didn't make the cut, as it didn't in the real season. So we were robbed of a 32-bit representation of one of the greatest F1 liveries of all time. And weirdly, Jacques Villeneuve hadn't given his rights to the game, so he wasn't in it. He just appeared as like an outline. You know, there'd be a little thumbnail image of all the drivers, and there'd be a silhouetted outline. So he looked a bit like a sort of a whistleblower on Panorama or something. Like they couldn't show his face. And Mario Walker on the commentary would refer to him as Williams #1 or the Canadian, like he was some sort of supervillain. And as I said, Mario Walker did the commentary amazingly as well. Really good commentary, especially for this era. Right up there with Barry Davis in Actual Soccer 2. So that was a real bonus, with Martin Brundle doing very, very wooden co-commentary on the side.
Did somebody write in about this?
I think
say that Murray Walker would do most of the commentary, and every so often Martin Brundle would just appear saying, "You're right there, Murray," or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm sure someone wrote in about that.
It's definitely been mentioned on the pod before.
Unbelievable! Remarkable! Exceptional! Ouch! Oh no! Look at this! Look at this!
You're right there, Murray.
And I've chosen it because basically, as I said, it hit exactly the right time in my life, and it was a genuinely good game, and it's looked back on very fondly by a lot of people, including myself, so that's why I've chosen it. Did you ever play it?
Fantastic. We had Formula 1. We had the original one.
Oh, you had the original, yeah.
Which I remember my dad lent to somebody, and then we didn't get it back for ages, and I really wanted to play it. And then the day that he turned back up from his day at work and he had the game back off the person he lent it to, I then went up and played it quite a lot. But I think Formula 1 97 is a case of the sequel being surpassing the original and being the better game. A shame that MasterCard Lola and Ricardo Tossa weren't represented, but you can't have everything.
What's your second choice then?
Well, I am going to stick with the racing theme, if I may, and I'm going to go for a game that came out in November 1997. I'm going for Diddy Kong Racing.
Excellent. Yes, big name.
Big name. Now, we've spoken about this before, I think, on the pod. You didn't have an N64 at the time. Did you have friends who had an N64? Did you play this game?
I never played it, no. I still have, when I see the N64 or hear mention of it, I have a Pavlovian recoil because I was so devoted in the rivalry. Because it was a rivalry, wasn't it, between PlayStation and N64?
Of course, yeah, big time.
And we were at an age where that sort of stuff really mattered. I genuinely hated the N64 and sort of anyone who had one. No, that's not true. I didn't hate anyone who had one, but I genuinely do get that slight Pavlovian feeling when I see it because of that, how strong it was there. So, yeah, I didn't play them very much at all. So I don't think I ever did play Diddy Kong.
Okay, well, you're in for a treat then next time you come and avail yourself of my hospitality for 90s night. I'll set the N64 up and we'll have a go on Diddy Kong, definitely. So this game arrived under the tree for me one Christmas, and this was the year that I had asked for Mario 64 and was really keen on that. We'd rented it from Forward Video and I'd played it for a few days and I decided that was a game I wanted. But Glyn, in hindsight, made a fantastic decision to get me Diddy Kong Racing instead. A second-hand copy with no instructions, I might add. but all the same, a much, much easier game for somebody of my age at the time to have played rather than Mario 64. I tried Mario 64 again 2 or 3 years ago, and I can still really make head nor tail of it. I think we've spoken about this on the pod before as well. So a great decision there from Glyn. I can't deny that. So yeah, I've replayed Diddy Kong Racing recently as well as Mario 64, and I think it's still really, really playable. I prefer it to its big competitor at the time, which would have been Mario Kart 64. So I think of the two games, I prefer Diddy Kong Racing. I think there's more to it. I think there's more things you can do in the game to keep you coming back. The Silver Coin Challenge, which is after you've beaten all the tracks and you've finished in first place the first time round, you then have to go and win the races again, but also while collecting 8 silver coins that are dotted around the track over the course of 3 laps. And this is one of these games where I played it to a certain point when I was younger and I couldn't get any further. I've now played it to a certain point as an adult and I still can't get any further. And that is the aptly named Greenwood Forest area where the silver coin challenge is just too difficult and I can't collect all the coins and win the races at the same time. You really need to be able to use all of the different things that are dotted around the track to give you a speed boost and the shortcuts and things like that, and you have to be so unerring in your accuracy as well. This goes back to my point I've aired on the pod before, that I think video games were a lot harder back in the N64 days than they are now, even something like Diddy Kong Racing. I think the plot of the game is excellent. So it concerns Timber the Tiger, whose parents go on holiday, and then they leave Timber in charge of the island. This is the island that him and his friends race on, and the island is taken over by, and it says here, a sinister intergalactic pig wizard named Wizpig, and then he basically makes them win all these races in order to get the island back. So I think it's a great storyline as well, with different bosses along the way. One strong memory I have that links to Diddy Kong Racing doesn't actually involve playing it. This happened years later when I was in sixth form, and my friends and I, well, I said more my friends and I don't think I ever did it because I was a bit of a square, but my friends had figured out how to mask your phone number when dialing somebody to make it come up as no caller ID. Put the secret of numbers in front of the number you were dialing. I can't remember. And somebody called my mobile at about 1:30 in the morning or 2 o'clock after we'd been out for the evening, and I'd come back, and then I think they'd stayed out, so there was a no caller ID going on my phone at 2 a.m. But in the days when you left phones on loud instead of on silent all the time, my phone was ringing in my bedroom on the loudest possible tone, and my ringtone at the time was the main theme from Diddy Kong Racing. So if you can picture the scene with my parents going mad in the background and I can't find my phone, I don't know where it is in my room, I left it in a pocket or something, as I scrambled around looking for that phone in the dead of night with this tune playing. So many fond memories linked to Diddy Kong Racing. Certainly my favourite racing game on the N64. One of my favourite racing games of all time, and I had to choose it here.
Lovely. Yeah, I think it's quite interesting that N64 had two big blue ribbon racing games of that ilk at the same sort of time in Mario Kart and Diddy Kong. I'm glad you've chosen Diddy Kong because it is the lesser known of the two, and it hasn't gone on to have lots of sequels. As far as I know, maybe it has, but Mario Kart sort of took the crown. So yeah, it's good to know that Diddy Kong did have its fans back in the day.
Yeah, Mario Kart is what it is today, and it's gone on to be on various consoles over the years and on arcade machines and things like that. But Diddy Kong Racing really is a moment in time. And I guess that it's Rare, who made Diddy Kong Racing, who made my third game I'm going to talk about, but they must have had the license for Diddy Kong, I'm guessing, because Donkey Kong was in Mario Kart, right? So Donkey Kong is in Mario Kart, and then is Diddy Kong his nephew? Or his son?
I'm not sure what the family tree is for the Kongs.
The Kong family tree. Okay, right, we need to look that up.
So my second choice is the beginning of a huge dynasty, arguably the biggest dynasty in gaming. It is, of course, the original Grand Theft Auto, released in Europe, November and December on the PC and then the PlayStation, developed by DMA and published by BMG. So this is some years before Rockstar sort of took over that company and became the company it is. So as I say, this has gone on to become a massive franchise. I don't need to tell anyone this. Even people who aren't into gaming will have heard of Grand Theft Auto. But this is where it began. And I remember distinctly reading about this in an article that was it was like a coming up article in Official PlayStation magazine, which was my Bible basically at this time. And I remember just being fascinated straight away by the idea of this, the screenshots from the development, and what they were saying about it. It was just so different to anything else I'd played. Because I think open world sort of sandbox games, I'm sure they existed in versions on, the PC and other gaming systems, in sort of games like Elite maybe, kind of sci-fi games and role-playing games. But in terms of this style and on consoles, in this generation of consoles, I think this was pretty unique and original. And a driving-based one as well. I don't know if there'd been any driving-based sandbox games. Of course, there'd been the third part of the Die Hard trilogy game where you could drive the car around the city. And in theory, you could sort of drive anywhere you wanted, but it wasn't. You had a very strict time limit, and the city was just sort of, it was nothing, was it? It was just the same buildings getting replicated over and over again. So it wasn't really sandbox. But that gave me a feel for it, and I remember being slightly excited by that idea. So when this came along, and you really could drive wherever you wanted, and not only that, but you could get out of the car and steal other cars, any car you wanted. It was just such a wild idea. You would just drive around, do these missions based on various crimes. You could run people over, anyone you wanted. So it was quite... Well, I'm not going to say graphic, because the graphics were not good enough for it to be that graphic, if you know what I mean. But, you know, you were killing people. So I think it was an 18, I think, which is probably the first time I ever saw that 18 certificate symbol that you get on DVDs or VHSs and films. So to see that on a game box was really quite exciting. And I mean, you're probably working out that I must have played this before I was 18, because in 97 I was 12. And I'm pretty sure there was a demo on the PlayStation magazine. But now I'm thinking that can't be true, because how could they have had a demo of a game that was 18? So I don't know, but I managed to play it somehow. Eventually I owned it, and just chosen it really because it was such an exciting concept. I think exploration is obviously something that everyone loves, whether you're a child or an adult. To be able to do that in a game is perfect, because you can explore without, you know, leaving your sofa. And this was the first game that I had ever played that really had that proper element of exploration in it. And yeah, it was just thrilling. It was fun to play, and I've gone on to love all of the sequels, you know, with some caveats about some of the content in the later ones, but I have played all of them. And yeah, so this is where it all started, and I had to pick it really for that.
It's the start of the biggest gaming dynasty of all time, I think, isn't it? I don't think that's... I don't think there's going to be much argument about that. I remember having the original Grand Theft Auto, and then I don't know if this was an expansion or a standalone game on its own, whether you had to have the original one to run the other, but there was a London 1969 version as well. That
was a sort of add-on, but you could play it independently, but it was just not as big as the original. It was like a smaller map, I think. Yeah, I remember that.
So I remember playing both of those. I remember getting one of those sold-out software discs. If you remember those, used to be sort of budget PC software brands. There were two games that had been out for a while for like £5 or £10 or something.
Yeah.
And I remember playing the first Grand Theft on that, and not being very good at it, not really ever getting the hang of the top-down mechanics. I've always been a behind. If I'm driving a car on a game now, I like to be behind as opposed to in the car. I've just always found it a lot easier that way. But yeah, I mean, that was a game that I have fond memories of playing, despite the fact that I wasn't very good at it. I must have been about the same age, I think, when I started playing it. I'm not entirely sure that... Well, certainly my mum won't have known what was going on. My dad probably did, but but thought it would be okay. And yeah, what a fantastic game.
Right, what's your third and final choice then?
I couldn't complete my choices for my favourite games of 1997 without talking about the greatest first-person shooter of all time. I'm not going to be entertaining any debate about this. Please don't write in. It's GoldenEye. We all know it's GoldenEye. I'm going to be talking about GoldenEye. So when I when I bought an N64 again a couple of years ago, this was of course one of the first games that I bought to go with it. So I've played it again in the last few years, and I have actually completed it. This is an N64 game that I've managed to complete, I'm very proud to say, although on the easiest mode, and I'm not ashamed about that. Games were a lot harder back then, as I keep saying. That's the crutch that I am holding on to here. So I'm very, very proud of that achievement, but it was one that I just loved playing when I was younger, even though I didn't have a chance of completing the game. My dad was going forward and actually playing the game properly, but then what I could do is I could go on his save game and replay any of the levels that he'd already completed and just mess around. So I would be able to just go into those levels and use cheat modes. There were some great cheats with the enemy soldiers having massive heads. It was probably one of the most famous cheats. I always thought there were a couple of them that looked a little bit like Aston Villa players from the time. So there was one that looked like Steve Staunton and one that looked like Savo Milosevic, and I don't know if that was one of the developers of the game putting that in as a little Easter egg. My favourite level was the silo level, where you have to stop the rocket launch from taking place and you're moving up through the levels of the silo and doing that. I don't really know what else I can say. It's just, I think it's rightly regarded as the best game of the 90s and one of the best games of all time. There's a brilliant documentary that's on Amazon Prime at the moment called Golden Era, which is all about the game's creation and how it became so popular. Like Grand Theft Auto, it didn't get great reviews on first release, but then it quickly garnered a lot of attention and got a lot of sales behind it, and people began realising what a great game it actually was. And GoldenEye the game came out 2 years after GoldenEye the movie, so clearly there was still some worth in releasing a game from a movie that came out 2 years previously, and there was still some benefit to be had from that tie-in and waiting so long to do it. And it really paid off, and like I say, it's one of my favourite games of all time. That and Diddy Kong Racing are probably my two favourite games from the N64 years, so that's why I've included both of them here. But if I was going to pick one of them, I think for playability and fond memories of watching my dad play it and then having to go myself afterwards, I think it's GoldenEye would have to be my top pick from this lot.
Yeah, that's great. It's always nice when you've got a personal connection, a personal memory to these games, and something you can sort of pinpoint as being a point where it was, it was getting lodged in your psyche for forever. Was it a game, because I never really played it, so I don't have much experience of it, but was the one-player game any good? Because I know it's so famous as a multiplayer game. What was the single-player game like?
Yeah, the multiplayer aspect is one of the most famous aspects of it, and the fact that the N64 had 4 controller ports, so you could have a four-way split screen. I think Joe Barter's told the story on the podcast before, I don't remember this, about him beating me on multiplayer on GoldenEye and then apparently just walked up and turned the console off and said, right, we're going to do something else. I don't remember that, Joe. I think you might have misremembered that. Doesn't sound like something I would do. But the one-player version of the game, and obviously you could play it on different difficulties, but it quite closely followed the plot of the film. Well, as you say, the multiplayer capability is very famous. I think the one-player sort of plot version has a lot going for it as well.
I'm really surprised to hear that it was reviewed badly. I had no idea that it was relying on a resurgence to find the status it now has.
I think it's unfair to say badly. I might have misspoke that. I think it was just reviewed in a lukewarm way, like nobody really knew what to make of it or knew that it was going to go on to do what it did, and it was only after it had been out for a little while that it quickly gained that reputation as being one of the best games on the N64. But yeah, it certainly didn't go as planned in the first place.
Yeah. It's quite rare for a game that's a movie tie-in to be that good and big as well, isn't it? Often movie tie-in games are a bit half-baked and sort of kind of just for the money. So yeah, that was definitely one of the games that bucked that trend, and yeah, look where it is now in the pantheon of great games.
Well, the fact that people still remember it so fondly, and there's been a documentary made about it, and if you say Nintendo 64 to somebody, chances are one of the first things they'll say back is GoldenEye. They'll have either owned it themselves or will have played it on multiplayer with somebody, and it is one of the games that is most commonly associated with the N64.
Well, if you've picked the greatest ever first-person shooter, your words, not mine, then I have... If anything's going to be able to trump that, it's the greatest game of all time, which is, of course, Final Fantasy VII. I talked about it in our episode on games from 95 to 99, which we did, at least 2 years ago now. And nothing's changed in those 2 years. It still is, I think, my favourite game of all time. One of the greatest console games. It was on the PC as well, but one of the greatest games of all time, full stop. And yeah, it was a strange sort of introduction to me, because I wasn't into RPGs. I never even played an RPG before. It was a new concept to me. And I remember it getting talked about in official PlayStation magazine, where it got 10 out of 10, which was really rare actually, for that magazine. and my brother was saying like, there's a buzz around this game, we should probably get it, and I didn't really want to get it. I was more into games like Destruction Derby or Die Hard, where it was like you just pick it up and you play, and it's like it's all there. It's really it's like a sugar rush of gaming. But we gave it a go. We couldn't ignore the reviews, and yeah, it sort of changed everything for me. So it's an RPG that follows a band of eco warriors who have to sort of travel from a city that's being destroyed and taken over by an evil corporation, and sort of cross this continent and go to all these different towns and villages and basically save the world. And it's one of the first games I ever played where you could change the name of the characters. So I could change the main player, who's called Cloud. I could change that to Alex, and I could change the other people in the gang to my friends. One of the main female protagonists in the game, I changed the name to the girl I had a crush on at school. And those things all combined to sort of just added... It's such a simple thing, changing the names of the characters you're playing to people you know. But it had it just really added to the experience and made it much more personal and made me much more invested in the whole thing. And that combined with the fact that it was just such an epic, sweeping story. It's obviously been made into a film, and it's been remade quite recently. And it's a long game as well. It took me well over 100 hours, which I did over the course of, I think, a couple of years, or maybe a year and a half or so. It just all added up to create this really epic... this epic gaming experience, which has never really left me, and probably will never be superseded, because nothing's ever going to be able to match that nostalgic experience in my life. And yeah, I had to choose it again. I know I've spoken about it before, but it's Final Fantasy VII, so that's why it's a third of my 3 games from '97.
So what I was doing with FIFA and Laycock Town, you were doing with Final Fantasy VII.
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
It's all about editing and customization. It just makes for a better experience, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
I know we've mentioned a few of these games before on the podcast, but it was a long time ago. I don't think anybody's going to blame us for wanting to come back to our favourites of all time. I mean, I've spoken about 2 of my big favourites of all time. You've spoken about your favourite of all time, Final Fantasy VII. And when a game affects you in that way, and you're certain that no other game is ever going to affect you in that way, it makes it worth it that you moved away from Destruction Derby and you trusted the reviews and you went on that journey with that game. And it just makes it such a precious memory in your gaming history. And what you have for Final Fantasy VII, I have for Football Manager 2020. But we can't talk about that on this podcast.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You can't let these giants lie. You can't ignore them. They'd just be the elephant in the room, wouldn't they? So, no regrets. They're in our top 3. Right, we have a little bit of correspondence from listeners on this topic. This is from Adam, brother and legend of the pod. He says, I'm excited to listen to this one. Final Fantasy VII was a huge game for me. We bought it a little later, but I ended up finishing it years later, maybe 2005 after finishing university. I think I'd lost the thread of the plot slightly, but it was probably the first game with a proper narrative to it that I played from start to finish. And because it was over such a prolonged period, it felt like a huge deal to me. So, there you go. That's another vote in the Greenwood Grosvenor family for Final Fantasy VII there. And a couple of other things here this is from Mole, friend of the pod. He says, what a year 97 was. I am going to have to choose Final Fantasy VII because it's the best game of all time, or at least of my childhood. So again, another vote for Final Fantasy VII. I swear I haven't just vetted these. I haven't edited out all the other
I was going to say,
this
is beginning to sound a bit sus.
And then Tim Watson says, my favourite game as a kid was Vandal Hearts, and that came out in 1997. It was an RPG game, and it was awesome. Now, I remember Vandal Hearts coming out, but I'd never played it. I don't suppose you ever played it, did you?
I didn't know. No, I can't say I've heard of that one.
But yeah, good shout there, and thanks to those guys for giving us their opinions. If you want to tell us what your favourite game of 1997 was, then please do get in touch. Well, that was a lot of fun there, Stu. I always love talking about computer games from the 90s. It's obviously one of mine, and I know one of your favourite topics that we talk about. So, it's just a big year, isn't it? A big year for gaming.
Oh, massive. I think 97 is my favourite year so far that we've discussed. two of my favourite games of all time in that year, as it happens, and a very strong contender in FIFA Road to the World Cup '98 as well. So 3 games there that I really enjoyed talking about and going down memory lane for, as I'm sure you did with all yours, particularly Final Fantasy. Although you didn't have to fabricate all that correspondence to get the point across, but we'll try and move past that if we can. Oh, by the way, sorry, bit of breaking news hot off the press. Diddy Kong is Donkey Kong's sidekick and best friend, although has also been referred to as Donkey Kong's nephew. So there does seem to be a little bit of conflicting information available here as to the relationship between Donkey and Diddy Kong. But as with Adam Lowthorpe, we'll keep our ear to the ground, we'll do the research, and we'll come back to you next time with a definitive answer.
Yeah. Well, you never know. I know it's unlikely, but you never know. We might be able to get one of them on the pod, and they can actually tell us in person. That would be amazing.
Do we know Diddy Kong's agent?
No, but I think there'll be some channels. Jeff will know somewhere.
Yeah, we can look him up in the book, won't we? He'd be all right.
Yeah. Right then, I don't think, Stu, we know what we're doing on the next pod, do we?
No, it might not surprise you to hear that we don't.
We'll think of something now, so don't worry.
Oh, there's always something to talk about, yeah. Don't worry about that.
Something. Contrary to what your dad says, there's still stuff to talk about in the 90s.
We're still going, Glyn. We're still going. Although, he could quite easily come on and we could record the hair metal versus 90s rock episode, couldn't we? But he doesn't seem to want to do it. So no. What can I say? There's an episode there waiting to be made, but he's reluctant to come on for some reason. Not sure why.
Yeah, maybe we'll give out his mobile number in the episode description so you can just give him a text or a ring and say, urge him to come on and challenge me in the new metal versus hair metal challenge. But if you do want to get in touch with us on anything else that you've heard in this or any previous episode, you can find us on our link tree, now featuring Blue Sky. And not featuring X, because we've flounced out, slamming the door behind us, and left. Well, I don't want to say anything else about that platform.
No. Let's look forward, never back.
Yeah, so come and join us on Blue Sky, and we'd love to hear from you on that platform or any other platform you can find on our link tree. But that just about wraps us up, so it just remains for me to say goodbye and thanks for listening. I am just off to watch a full playthrough of Final Fantasy VII on YouTube, all 70 hours of it.
And it's goodbye from me. I'm just off to have a look in the paper and see if there's any chance that Simon Shaw's going to be back playing at right back for Laycock Town before the end of the season.
Goodbye.
Till next time. No, Algie, hang on, I've got to get him out, wait a minute. Algie, come on, son. I'm trying to work it. I've got to keep the listeners happy, come on.